Today, I want to talk to you about what not to do when you're faced with high-pressure situations like crises and emergencies, as well as what the best thing to do is in a situation like that. Keep listening to learn more. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Philosophy Podcast, a bite-sized weekly podcast focused on empowering you to think better and upgrade your life. So let's talk about dealing with high-pressure situations like crises and emergencies. But before we get into that, I have a question for you. How do you think most people deal with a crisis situation? A. They stay calm. Or B. They panic and lose it. How do you think most people react to that? If you said B, that most people panic, then you are absolutely correct. Unfortunately, the default response for most people when faced with a crisis situation is to lose their nerves and panic. Really unfortunate. Whenever there is an emergency or crisis, the fight or flight responses are pretty much what it comes down to. And for most people, the flight response is the one that becomes the default. Flight, not fight. Most people want to just run away from crisis situations as fast as possible, often before even confirming whether there really is anything worth panicking about. This is why panic and chaos is the usual result of pretty much any big crisis situation you hear about. Too many people have died, in fact, as a result of stampedes caused by panic. Unfortunately, something like this happened very recently, just 3 days ago, in Israel, where, according to Reuters, at least 45 people died when there was a panic stampede following the collapse of a structure. 45 people. That's a lot of senseless deaths. But unfortunately, that was not the biggest case of casualties resulting from a panic stampede. In August 2005, more than 1,000 people were killed as a result of a panic stampede in Baghdad, caused by a rumor about a suicide bomber. A rumor. There are too many instances like this, and far too many people have lost their lives or have become critically injured as a result of panic. And the really sad part is, often there was actually no real reason to panic, like that rumor situation caused in Baghdad. I did not want to just assume though that panic is the default response for most people, so I did a small survey and asked 101 people what they think the usual response would be. The very same question I asked you in the beginning. I'll tell you more about my findings a bit later. But as far as crisis situations go, the current coronavirus pandemic is an ideal example of a major crisis. And it shows you pretty clearly what the default response is for most people when faced with a high-pressure situation full of uncertainties. I still remember the first month of the pandemic and how most shops ran out of things like hand sanitizers. I even saw and read about many supermarkets running out of things like toilet papers. You must have seen the images of empty aisles. That was all over the news and social media. It is also highly likely that you saw this firsthand when you went to a supermarket at that time, as you would have seen the empty aisles and long queues of people buying a massive amount of stuff, like I did. People were stocking up like the world was coming to an end. You have experienced this, and you have seen the reports, the images, and even the memes, so you know what I'm talking about. Panic clearly was everywhere. But here we are now, still standing. Did the world end? No. Are the supplies and stocks in shops back to normal? Pretty much. Things might not be the best, but it most certainly is not as bad as many people expected. The way I saw most people behaving during those early days, it was like they were preparing for the end of days. Don't get me wrong, crisis situations are certainly something to be worried about. But panicking when faced with a high-pressure situation like a crisis or emergency rarely ever helps. Panic might seem like the default response, but it does not help at all. Do you know what does help them? Staying calm. Staying calm is the best way to deal with a crisis or emergency. When faced with a high-pressure situation, losing your nerve does not help at all, but it can make things worse. Panicking is clearly not good for you, but there is another important reason why staying calm is the better option. And it's because your response to a crisis can impact not just you, but others too. Others including the people you care about the most. Here's the thing. When people panic, it doesn't just negatively impact their own lives, it can impact others negatively too. Think of it like a snowball effect. More people panicking only causes more panic. These are the things that causes stampedes after all. Humans are highly social beings and we usually take a cue from others about what to do. Herd mentality is a very common thing. In high-pressure situations, that can become a bad thing, as panic just causes more panic. People see others panicking and they start panicking. That's pretty much what causes unfortunate situations like stampedes. I hope you have never had to experience this in real life, but if you have ever watched any movie or TV show about a crisis at a public place like a movie theater or a stadium, you have seen how the marshals and stewards and those in charge always advise people to leave in a calm and orderly fashion. Always calm and orderly fashion. And pretty much every time, most people do the exact opposite. And they start panicking and start rushing around. Those who don't then often also suffer as a result of the ones who panic. Panic can be very contagious, as others think they need to panic too. So this is yet another reason why choosing calm over panic is the option to go for. Not just for your own sake, but for others too. The reality is that more people suffer as a result of the panic than they do as a result of the actual crisis or emergency. Case in point is that Baghdad stampede I mentioned earlier. More than 1,000 people died over a rumor. That's completely senseless. It's insane. Clearly, panicking is never the good option, as it does not help you or others. But there is another big reason why panicking is ultimately bad for you, and that is the stress and anxiety that panic results in. When someone panics, the stress and anxiety level goes through the roof. The more panic there is, the worse the anxiety and stress level gets. It's like they spiral downwards, and you have experienced this if you have ever experienced panic. So the panic causes a lot of negative feelings and unhappiness. It's just a huge mess of unwanted emotions that you feel when you get panicked, and you let panic take charge of your emotions. Whereas working on staying calm helps you avoid that stress and anxiety. No one likes feeling stressed and anxious, and avoiding panic is a great way to avoid them. Panic is never good for you. Nearly always, you will find that there is a direct correlation between panic and the negative impact of the high-pressure, challenging situation. You will find that pretty much always, the more someone panics, the harder it is to actually deal with the situation. Harder. Panic makes things worse. As such, more panic ends up causing a worse experience and impact. But it gets worse, because the panic often ends up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. People panic because they assume the worst will happen, and they end up experiencing the worst because of the panic. Like a stampede. When you really think about it, you will realize just how insane that is. On the other hand, when challenging high-pressure situations are handled calmly, it gets easier to deal with them. But not just easier, it also becomes less challenging, and the possibility of actually resolving the crisis situation increases massively. From the solution point of view, here is the equation then. More panic equals a higher probability of not resolving the situation or making it worse, whereas more calm equals a higher probability of dealing with the situation and getting out of it okay. Panic makes things worse, whereas calm makes things better. Calm is always the better option. You know this already, by the way, even without me telling you. Instinctively, you know that being calm is the better way to deal with high-pressure challenging and crisis situations. You know this already. So it's simply a matter of becoming more aware of it and then consciously practicing that when things get complicated, and especially when all hell breaks loose. In case you need a recap, there are at least 3 big reasons why panic is ultimately bad for you. Number 1, it does not help you find any solutions, but can actually make things worse. It's hard to think clearly when you're in a state of panic. Number 2, it can make things worse for others too, including the people you care about. So it's not just you who can suffer, others can end up suffering too. And number 3, it causes you a lot of stress and anxiety and unhappiness. When you opt for panic, when you give in to the default emotion, it's like you choose to feel anxiety and stress. Surely you don't want to feel anxious and stressed. Those are bad feelings, no one wants that. So opting for panic, unfortunately, is exactly what causes more stress and anxiety. It should be pretty obvious to you by now that panic does you and others more harm than good. So panic is to be avoided as much as possible. Actually, at all costs. Look, I understand how easy it is to lose your nerve and start panicking when you're faced with a high-pressure situation, and especially when others around you start panicking. But you just need to take a deep breath and remind yourself that panicking only makes things worse. When dealing with a challenging situation, you need to stay calm, as that's how you stand a real chance of resolving things for the better and getting out of the crisis situation with the best possible outcome. Being calm helps you do that. Panicking does not. Here's the bottom line. Panicking and losing your nerve during high-stress, high-pressure crisis situations might seem like the only response, but it is not. And it does more harm than good. The opposite, staying strong and staying calm, is what ultimately helps and gives you the best chance to resolve the issue and deal with the situation. Staying calm, ultimately, is what helps. Panicking and losing your nerve does not. Oh, and you know that survey I ran? Of the 101 people I asked that question, the vast majority said that most people's default response when faced with a crisis situation is to panic. Over 64% of the people I surveyed said that panic is the default response for the majority of people. Now, panic might be the default response for most people, but it does not have to be, especially for you. You can choose calm over panic in a high-pressure situation. We all can, and need to. It won't be easy, but it certainly can be done. And you already know how it can help you, so the benefits hardly need repeating. Just try this next time you're faced with a really stressful or crisis situation. Take a deep breath and resist the temptation to panic, even if others around you are. Just take a deep breath and resist the panic temptation. Stay calm and you will figure your way out of it. Don't choose panic. Choose instead to stay calm. I would love to hear about your experience and your thoughts on this matter. So before I end this talk, I have a question for you. How do you usually deal with unexpected and high-pressure situations? How do you deal with them? You can let me know on my Twitter, my blog, or on the podcast itself. I sincerely hope that you found this talk useful and that you took at least one thing away from this that can help you improve your life. If you have any questions or suggestions or even ideas for future topics, feel free to send them to me. The links are in the description. And if you enjoyed this talk, please remember to like, subscribe, and share this with others. That's it for today. I look forward to having you all listen in again next week. Same place, same time. Until then, remember to take care of yourself and stay calm in high-pressure situations. Alright everyone, have a great week.